What's up, guys? Welcome to the how to play video for the Gundam MS War card game. My name is Derek.
And I am Basayan. Welcome, everybody.
And we, together, have been working on this game, or at least new versions of the rules for this game, for quite some time. It's a game from 2001, but it was not really much of a game when it first came out. It was mostly just how does Bandai make money off of a popular franchise. But buried in there is a game that could actually be fairly serviceable. So with a little bit of work and some serious playtesting, we think we're about there. We think we found out what's the sweet spot for this to be a pretty playable game.
This current version we call 2.1. Derek has been working on this card game actually way before I entered the scene. But we have definitely spent a lot of time in this current year of 2020 just redeveloping some of the rule set and definitely putting in a lot of mileage in terms of playtesting to make sure that there is a good amount of balance in the game and just making a lot of cards playable that were previously, well, trash, really, to be honest.
There's a lot of issues where maybe it was a translation issue, or maybe not a primarily English-speaking design team, or just straight up laziness. But there are some cards that just actively don't work. They have cards. They reference cards that didn't exist. They have effects that aren't worded in English sentences. It's been a serious struggle erratating some of the cards. It's been a journey, but I think most of them are into a spot where everything is much more refined and makes a lot more sense.
So what's the first thing to discuss?
Well, I think the first thing to discuss is to get into what exactly would be involved, what you would need to play the game, and what the individual pieces of the game, entail. We each have a handful of cards here to show off kind of the individual card types. There are four factions in the game, two series that are represented: Gundam Wing and Mobile Suit Gundam. There are four primary card types: Mobile Suit cards, Pilot cards, Event cards, and Battlefields. Now each of these cards tells you and means various different things. But just starting with kind of a basic rundown of a MS card, you have a cost. This is obviously just the cost involved to play the card from your hand onto the board. They also have a clash points, which is their attack and defense power. This is the gold stamp card, so it's a little harder to see, but that's a 5 there. There's a rarity icon on the left side of the card, and then just the name of the unit and its weapon. At this point in the game, the weapons really are flavor text at best at this point. But they're just text that they added there. Then, of course, you have your ability text box as well. Next, you have pilot cards. Buzz, I'll let you run us through that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, luckily, one of the great things about all of these cards is that actually the card design is quite clear. So it's fairly easy to say whether you're looking at a pilot card. First of all, you haven't got a gun, you haven't got a clash point. You still have the price of the card at the same area right next to the faction the card belongs to. Same rarity, and obviously the name makes any pilot unique. So when you play them, you have to make sure that you haven't got, there's no two Amuro Rays, there's no Hero Uis. Obviously, you can only have one of them in your side of the battlefield. And the same stuff here. There might be one of the key things really with the release of the sort of what we call set 3, which are the starter sets for Earth Federation and Xeon. We have the new type pilots come into play, so you can see whether they are new type or not. And the same, their effect box obviously is an effect that you can use depending on what's happening in play.
Yeah, Buzz brings up a great point there too, with unique effects just being important to card types. Obviously, within the series, there are grunt units that there would be mass-produced versions of, as well as their unique individual one-ofs of suits that had not been mass-produced. With the original game, there was no real clear identification of this. Their original rule was just that you couldn't have multiple versions of a card out. We've edited that, obviously, for the purposes of mass-produced units and things, but part of the erratas that we'll be adding to each of the unique cards is next to their name, there will be a small dot. The dot will indicate a unique unit. You can only have one copy of that unit on the board at a time. And importantly as well, with some of these MS cards, is the model number. There are versions of Wing Zero and then Wing Zero Custom that would be the same card per their model number. They're both unique, so you couldn't have those in play at the same time because they're technically the same unit. That's just one little point I forgot to mention, and Buzz brought up real well.
Derek, you've done an excellent job in actually compiling the list of all the unique groups as well, which is of course available to anybody who's interested. You will find links down in the description below to find all these valuable.
Yep. Yeah, the links included below will include a link to the Facebook group for the page that now moderates the game itself, a wiki link for the sort of just general hub website of the game, and then from the Facebook page itself, you can also get the rulebook, which we're going to be just referencing here within the video, as well as the list of erratas, which will include all of the unique pilots, unique units, all of the new texts, things like that. And then on the Facebook page, you can also find a scan of all of the cards released for the game.
So guys, if you do find a starter deck for this game, take out the rulebook and just put it in your trash bin.
Just throw it away. Also, there are mission objective cards that are the sort of 5th card type. Just kindle the fire in your home with them. Just cook some dinner, do whatever you need to do, throw them in the trash. Meaningless. But our 3rd card type that matters is event cards. Just like Buzz mentioned, card types are very consistent. You have cost, rarity, name, effect. Event cards are more like instants or sorceries in Magic the Gathering terms. It's kind of the de facto way to refer to card games. But they're essentially effects that you play to either boost the effectiveness of one of your units, discard cards from your opponent's hand, draw cards, discard cards, various effects to enhance the game state. And this one specifically does a lot of damage to the game state and gets rid of everything.
Dark hole for those.
Yeah, good old dark hole, good old Wrath of God.
Absolutely. And then our final card type are battlefield cards. There has been an extraordinary amount of changes when it comes to battlefield cards compared to the original rule set and what now. Each player can have their own battlefield card in play, and they can only be removed by card effects. So unique cards can't attack into battlefield cards. You must have specific events or pilots or other unique cards that actually remove battlefields from the play. But again, if you look at any one of these cards, same spot you can see next to the faction, there is one that's the card cost, and then we got the rarity. We actually have the name. This particular one is a promo card. It actually says Los Angeles, California. A lot of the cards, like what Derek's holding up, is the level 1 colony from Wing Gundam. Each of these battlefield cards have a requirement to be able to put them into play. So for example, this one I'm holding, you need to have a Gundam in play to be able to play this card. Then you find the effect, which is whatever it grants you. And the final important part is the battle scars. So when this battlefield is removed from play, the owner of this battlefield card will receive some sort of a negative effect based again roughly on the strongness of the card or how difficult it is to get it out. You will find quite hefty battle scars. Sometimes your opponent gets quite a big advantage if they can remove them, and that's one of the reasons why these cards were so unplayable previously. With the original rule set, you could only have one of these out in play at any given time, and if your opponent just played their own, yours got removed, and you immediately suffered a battle scar. So, as far as we know, people really didn't play Battlefields at all. It was just too big a drawback.
Yeah. And that being said, the energy system, which we'll get to in a minute, was dramatically different, and you paid for cards by milling cards out of your deck, which we'll get to why that's bad in a second. But if you had a battlefield card, which you had to pay 3 from your deck to be able to play, and then when it was destroyed, hit your opponent, like this one, for example, your opponent gets to just destroy one card of their choice. That's a lot for a card that hurts yourself and then hurts you even worse if it's gone. And its effect is pretty decent, but there's a lot of drawback to it. But with the way the energy system's been changed, everything sort of balances out a lot better into the way that you can utilize your resources. It doesn't hurt nearly as bad. It's harder to get rid of them. Everyone can have one in play, like Buzz mentioned, and it becomes a much more versatile card type.
So, how do I win in this game?
Well, the primary objective sort of stays from the original game. You have to score what's called war experience points. You need 6 of them to win.
You actually get these little tokens in the starter decks.
Yep. Or you can just use a dice, a 6-sided dice, pile of quarters, whatever you want to use. It's up to you. Works perfectly fine.
How do I get a war experience point?
When you when your Mobile Suit cards battle in the game, if you destroy one of your opponent's cards, you gain a war experience. If, for example, both units are destroyed, which we'll get to in a minute about how actual combat works, if both units are destroyed, though, no one scores anything. From a sort of lore standpoint, nobody lived to get any experience. We tried to keep everything as sort of logical as possible when it comes to that. But the mission objectives from before, they used to give you like various little things to try to accomplish and different results that could happen. But out the window now, it's just score 6 war experience points. Or there is a second alternative win. Your opponent runs out of cards in their deck, and that's the game. Now that's important because damage in this game is dealt to your opponent's deck, which in this game is called the supply base. So you are attacking your opponent's base, and every time that you deal damage unblocked to them, they mill cards off the top of their deck. Now, as we mentioned before, with the energy system from the previous game, milling cards off your deck to play cards, in addition to taking damage, just meant you went through your deck incredibly fast. But it also meant that cards didn't have any real weight, because on turn 1, you could play a 6-cost card by just milling 6 cards off your deck and have the best card in your deck on the board. Obviously, it doesn't work very well for a game that's anywhere near serious, so that's been changed a lot.
We've introduced an energy system, and it's quite actually similar to sort of the modern card games, as we call them, where you basically, rather than having specific cards like in Magic the Gathering, you got lands that you basically just clog off your deck with to be able to play your other cards. Any card in your deck can be an energy. All you need to do is pick a card from your hand, put it down, face down. Okay. So you don't know. No, sorry. From the top of your deck, you do it, don't you?
Yep.
Sorry.
So yes, to start of your turn, you take an energy. You draw a card for turn, of course, and then an energy for a card from the top of your deck goes into your factory, as it's called in this game, or your energy, if you're referring to various other games, your lands, if you're thinking Magic terms. But in this game, it's called a factory, and it's called a material. Within your factory, they're just placed there face down.
Yes. So thank you for that correction. There's so many different systems, obviously, in different games. So
we went through a few of them too.
During testing as well, and the beauty of this is that you don't know actually what is in your factory, what is giving you energy. So
inversely, your opponent doesn't either. So you're not just immediately giving away the contents of your deck to your opponent.
What you can do, you can actually switch. So you can pick one card in your hand that you might not feel you wanted, and you can swap it with any of the face down cards from your factory. And it is a bit of a gamble, and you can only do these with cards Once you have switched the card, that card is face up now, that must stay in your factory. So that is now a known card. It's still generating you that one energy or that one building material that you need. But it gives you a little bit more of a card access to different cards, and obviously give you a bit more opportunity to cycle the cards out of your hand as well.
Yeah, and it's another resource that you have to play with, that you have to keep track of, that gives you a little bit more advantage, well, disadvantage as well. You are losing cards from your deck that you don't know what's there, but you do have sort of a second hand that you can kind of once per turn get effects from. And as he said, once a card is face up, it is there. You can't switch that card out. It is stuck. Once per turn, you can pick another face down card, put a card face up from your hand in its place, and then move on.
So what we do is every deck has to be exactly 50 cards. That would be your starting point when you're looking at building a deck. Make sure you got 50 cards. You want to have obviously a healthy amount of mobile suits. Those will be doing your battling and your defending, so you definitely want to look at having at least a good around the number of 20 is what's been working for me.
20 seems to be pretty close for me too. 20, 23. If I get any more than that, I feel kind of flooded.
You can buff these guys up with pilots. Some pilots want to be on the suits. Some pilots actually want to be in the dock. We refer to them as dock pilots.
Yep.
And I find it's more of a variable figure when it comes to pilots and the different characters in the game. It really depends on what type of deck you want to build. When it comes to battlefields, I normally don't tend to run more than, 5, maybe 6 is the top for me.
Yep, I've got 5 in most of my decks. Kind of 3 of my primary one, 2 of like a sort of option. That's kind of the gist. You'll find that as you build, everything kind of falls into place with what you want your deck to do. Obviously, everyone's playstyle and deck type will differ, but 5 seems to be pretty reasonable to not feel like there's too many of these. Because really, once you play one, it stays there until your opponent can make it go away. So you don't want to have too many of them around anyway.
Sort of like, I tend to choose like a main battlefield card that I know is going to work with my particular deck design, and maybe have another one which is like a secondary option in case I don't draw into my main one, that I still get some sort of a support. And you obviously balance it out. You look at how much the cost is, how quickly you want to play it, what's the requirement. If your opponent removes it, what's the battle scar, can still be quite big. But yeah, 50 cards, that must be exactly 50 cards.
No more, no less.
It's just super important. Basically, this is your life tool as well. So we refer to it as supply base. And of course, you give it a nice big shuffle, and then we draw 7 cards up from our starting hand. And naturally, during deck building, you kind of want to make sure that you're following that usual curve that you see with any other card games. That's one of the big corrections, like Derek said previously. The old rule said that cards didn't have any weight. You could drop a super powerful card just by milling more cards up there. But you can't do it. First turn, you're gonna get one building material. Second turn, you're gonna get another one. So you have to follow that curve profile to what we see with any of these card games.
Yeah. When you, at the start of your turn, get to create a material from your deck to add to your factory, that is sort of the first thing that you do after drawing a card for the turn. You are, however, not required to do so. You can choose not to do that for the turn. That is completely up to you. You don't have to, say a game goes 10 turns, you don't have to continue burning cards from your deck to charge energy.
So once I got my 7-card starting hand, there is a place for a mulligan. And it's basically a system where you can shuffle any cards back into your deck that you don't want to see in your hand and draw back to 7. So if I'm looking at this, this is actually a very good starting hand. I got a 0 cost, which is particularly good for this deck. I got a 1 cost. I got my main character. So I probably wouldn't be looking at mulliganing too many cards. But depending from your play style, depending on what you want to play from it. Let's say maybe I want to shuffle these two back. So shuffle two back, give it a good old shuffle.
My hand is not quite as good as I'd like. I do have a low-cost pilot, which I can get on the board. His effect is nice. He makes my other pilots cost less. I probably would keep him. Keep a battle card. I do have kind of my goal card here, so I've got a few that I would hold on to. I'd put a few back just to try to get a little bit better start.
Whilst I've done my shuffling, I also dealt out the additional 2 cards. He gave me a white base, and he gave me a strong battlefield card as well. The only card I'm missing really now is my Gundam, but I'm sure eventually I'm going to see it as well. So I'm happy with the starting hand. See what they've got.
I got most of what I put back.
Oh,
so we'll see what happens. But from this point, you would do whatever feels most comfortable to you. Flip a coin, pick a number, rock, paper, scissors, fight to the death, whatever you want to do. Figure out who goes first. In this case, for the sake of example, we would say that I would go first. As a player who's going first, you wouldn't draw an additional card. That's sort of your consolation for not going, for getting to go first. That's your balancing act there, just like most games. But first thing you do, you take top card of your deck. It's placed into your energy, in your factory. Sorry, play a lot of Dragon Ball Super card game. It's called Energy, kind of ingrained in my brain. But into your factory, generate a material. From there, I would be allowed to play a card. This gets us into kind of our phases of the game. This is sort of your initial setup for how you would start a turn. This is what you do literally every single turn. Sans not drawing the card on the first turn. After that, first thing you do, draw a card, make an energy. From here, say I decided to, say I just really don't like my hand, I could, if I chose to, place a card here in its place and replace it. Now, just for the sake of keeping things separated, we do say face-up cards are displayed upside down. They're easiest to kind of keep track of what's separate from cards that will be on your board later. It's easier to keep them separate because there are a few sort of layers to the zones within the board. But from there, if that would get us into sort of the phases that we would have. You have what's called the preliminary phase. That's sort of the initial upkeep kind of phase, if you were to refer to another game. This is where you would do sort of all of this process. You would untap everything that you've got. Anything that you'd left in the battlefield from the previous turn would go back to your dock to sort of start over, and that just sort of resets your board state. Now, one thing that's unique to this game is the next phase is in kind of a weird spot. Plus, I'll let you cover that one.
Might be in a weird spot, but it really does open up the game and makes it very tactical.
Oh, yes.
Once you've got the preliminary phase, you move into your battle or your attack phase. It's realistically where all the battle happens. And because right after you've drawn the card and right after you charge your energy, you move into your battle phase. Well, if you haven't got any suits in play, there's nothing you can do. So
Luck.
It's built into the game that neither player can attack in their first turn. And once you have completed your battle phase, obviously at the end of each of these phases, your opponent has a chance to perhaps do some interaction if the card allows to do it. So what's important to remember is that you can't play event cards in your preliminary phase. However, during the battle phase and then consecutively in the strategy phase, you can. Now, what happens in the strategy phase, though?
Well, the strategy phase would be what you'd refer to as like a main phase in other card games. It's where you would play anything from your hand, anything that you wanted to do with your turn. This is the sort of bulk of your turn outside of the attacks themselves. In my case, with just one single energy here, I could choose to play a one-cost card from my hand. Most of the time, obviously, this is where your curve is going to be really, really important. Now, I have in my possession 3 one-cost cards that I could do here. Now, I could start by getting a MS card on the board. That gives me something that I can attack with next turn, sets up that process. or I could play a pilot onto the dock. Now, having a pilot on the dock may or may not mean anything. In the case of Trey's, it wouldn't really do anything. He'd just be hanging out waiting for a suit to get into. Or Duke, on the other hand, is one of the cards that Buzz referred to earlier as a dock pilot. His effect triggers while he is on the dock. He has sort of a global effect that affects everything else. He is not a pilot. He doesn't get into suits. He just hangs out on the dock itself. Now, in this case, it really would vary. It would depend a little bit on what you wanted your deck to do, how you wanted to get things set up. For me, I actually think I will play Duke as my first sort of card for the turn. He's just going to make the rest of my Oz pilots cost one less, which means this guy, next turn, is free. Now that does mean, however, that I've forfeited the ability to attack next turn because I don't have a battle card on the board now, an MS card.
So normally what happens if you don't attack in a phase, you get an additional phase at the end of your turn, which is called the Recuperation Phase.
And if this was my discard pile, the dry dock, as it's called in this game, if I didn't choose to attack, if I skipped my battle phase, I could take the top card of my dry dock and put it at the bottom of my supply base. This just gives you some incentive to not just pound through attacking with a deck. Sometimes that's the move, though. Sometimes you don't have anything to do, and it makes more sense not to go into battle. And from a lore standpoint, if you took some time to not get into a fight, you might have more time to help rebuild your base. So you get to put some cards back and get a little closer to not being dead.
And even though I'm in a natural environment, both of our playstyle is a little bit more on the aggressive side. This particular step here, to have the recuperation phase, gives already a good incentive for defensive decks, for more control-like decks to exist. You can just hang back, make sure that all your suits are defending, and as long as you're not attacking, you're always recirculating one of your cards from your dry dock back into your deck. Now, assuming, Derek, do you pass turn to me?
Yep, that would. I've spent all of my materials for the turn. I have expended them, as it's referred to in this game. Played my pilot. I have nothing left to do for the turn. No, in this phase, I would have played any event cards that I might have had as well. Anything that I felt needed to be played here could have been done. Any of the 4 card types can be played in this phase. But I have my pilot out. I'm done with the turn. That would be what I'd consider a whole turn for me, a whole turn 1.
Well, superb. That means it's now out. We also have our 7 card hands right here. And what we're first going to do is, because I'm going second, I now get to draw a card. Happy days. I live for drawing cards. So there you go. I draw a card.
Drawing cards wins games.
Now I'm going to take the top card of my deck, just as Derek did, and I will put it into my factory as my first material card. I'm looking into my hand, and I'm seeing that I have actually a duplicate character. So what I'm going to do is bring Bright Noah is going to be swapped for this unknown card. Again, just giving me a bit more of a card circulation and just expanding my hand a little bit. Now, my particular deck is quite good with like swarming out and getting smaller units out. The first thing that happens is obviously preliminary phase. I drew my card. I've charged my material. I did my swap. There's nothing else I can do. So we move into my battle phase. I got nothing down. So unless Derek wants to do anything during my battle phase, maybe play an event or anything.
I don't have anything I'd like to do, but I do get the option. You get the choice to do so at any passing of phase, or during the phases as well. After the active player, whoever's player's turn it is, chooses whether or not they are playing a card themselves. I have no response.
It's an early game. Derek doesn't have a response. This obviously will change in the future, probably, depending from what deck is being ran. But I'm going to move on to my strategy phase, or strat phase, how we call it. And I also have 1 energy, Happy Days. That will allow me to play a ball for 1. And this little guy, obviously, immediately there is some sort of a different element to the game where these small units, these low-cost units, normally wouldn't have made it into decks in the previous type of the game. They became...
For no reason.
absolutely no reason. There was no reason to run these little guys, but now they are building up your board. They can do early chit damage, and later on they can be very good blockers. However, my deck actually has some extra spice in it because the core fighter comes down for 0. And not only that, but it actually makes my Gundam cards cost 1 less.
Mm-hmm.
So with a very good, slightly lucky starting hand, you can actually power out a Gundam on turn 3, sometimes even turn 2. I did that once, and I think it's safe to say that that's a powerful.
That is the power move.
The power move. So even though I couldn't attack this turn, as you guys can see, I know Derek won't be able to attack next turn because he played a Dock Pilot. If he would have played that Leo that he said in his hand, he would be able to attack with that in his next turn. So I technically have now 2 blockers down in my field, which could stop one of his attacks next turn, but I don't have to worry about that. And because I have nothing else to play, I'm going to check my hand. I have 6 cards left, which is very important. Your max hand limit is 7. So the cards that you start with, 7 cards in hand, that's your hand limit as well. Well, I got 6 left. So I'm more than happy to pass it over to my opponent.
All right. Well, if we were to go back to my turn, the first thing I would do, draw a card for the turn, get another battlefield, cry about it, terrible draw. It's okay. We'll untap everything that would be on the board. He'd take a card from the deck. He would charge it, so I would be at 2. I would have the option again to swap a card from my hand face up into the material area of my factory, take a face down card out, put it back into my hand. I'd have two materials to spend for the turn. Now, kind of preparing for what I did last turn, obviously I think a really good move here would be to get a guy on the board. I'm already a turn behind as far as setting characters up, so getting this guy out would be a good move. That would cost me 1. He's just a 1 for 1, just like his other little guys, but he has a nice bonus effect that he can defend with an additional card. Now, we haven't really gotten into the actual defense and attack phase portions of the battle phase, but this guy's ability is really unique in that he can block with 2 guys at the same time. Normally, you can only block an attack with a single card.
It's normally 1-on-1.
1-on-1.
Only card effects can change that. So if you have a pilot attached to a suit, and the pilot read that, as long as this pilot is attached to an MS card, that MS card can defend with an additional MS card, or sometimes MS cards refer to each other, like Viate and Mercurius. Obviously, the dynamic duo, those cards are designed that they can attack or defend together, which is very, very, very important for
very strong,
sort of more advanced gameplay.
But if I were to play out my Leo card, that would cost me 1 of my 2 energy. Now, I could do something alternatively with a card in my hand here. I do have a 2-cost Leo.
Oh, I love that Leo.
This is one of my favorite Leos. He's a 2-cost. He has a effect called Preemptive Strike. It's kind of like First Strike in Magic, but he also can't defend. That's kind of his downside. But he is a little bit overstated for his cost. He's a 2/3. Now I could put this guy on the board. That's going to be both of my resources, both of my materials for the turn would be expended. But thanks to Duke on the board, I could also play trays for free. Then I could attach trays. He could get into a gun, attach him as such, and now I have a 5 Clash Point Leo on the board. Now, Trace's effect, he costs 1. When he is on an MS card, he just gives him 2 additional attack points. But he has to go on an Oz suit. Now, that used to be kind of an important thing. Now, a big part of deck building is you can't mix factions. You have to play a single faction. The Oz and Wing would not have worked together in the show. You wouldn't have Zeon and Earth Federation or Zeon and the Wing Gundam team working together, so that's how deck building works as well. But in this case, this is what I would do with a turn. I'd end my turn with a 5-power battle card on the board. After that, I'd go back to Buzz's turn and see what he has to do to answer that. I'm going to guess with his turn 2, probably not a ton.
I'm looking at what Derek's doing over there, and I'm thinking that's very strong. Every card game has its staples and trades. Luckily, that guy comes in any Oz starter deck. If you guys do find that worthwhile picking up, that's just a straight up good card.
You will find, if you find lots of actual physical cards online, obviously you're welcome to print everything off. With this being a 20-year-old dead card game, proxies are completely fine. I have some of them in some of my own decks. I, obviously, being part of the design team of this new version of this game now, I choose to have physical cards too. But that's completely up to you. If you're a collector and want to get into it, good luck. It's kind of hard to do, but they're there. And a lot of times, if you do find a lot, you'll find like 86 traces in it.
Oh, yes, absolutely. You will find a lot.
Which is great, because he's incredible.
It's very good to have that card around. I mean, any pilot that gives you +2 flash points for 1 energy, 1 obviously material, is very strong.
Or 0 materials in this case.
Oh, yeah, exactly. 0. Yeah, that's even better. So what I do is, as I did previously, I untap my materials, make sure that obviously I know this is a Bright Noah, comes untapped. I draw for my turn, and I will also take the opportunity to go up to 2 materials. And now I know that Derek cannot defend with that Leo.
Yep.
So this would be the perfect opportunity for me to attack. Now I'm looking at my board state, and I have Bull, which has 1 clash point, but it also has this ability that when Bull is attacking, its clash points increase by 1.
Yep.
So I kind of thinking, okay, well, I can quite easily get in for 2 damage here. However, what happens when Derek comes back onto me in my next turn? But I think what I'm going to do for now is I'm going to, from my dock, go out to the battlefield and swing at Derek for 2 clash points.
Yep. Now, at this point, I would choose to defend with a card. I don't have a card that can defend, so at this point, his attack would be declared and would proceed to start resolving. Now, at this point, he would have the opportunity to play an event card if he chooses to either increase his clash points, decrease mine, prevent something from blocking. This would kind of be his sort of priority window to play out a card. Now, he is, because it is his turn 2, he has 2 open materials and could make that decision.
And I'm going to make the decision to not do anything else.
All right, so he doesn't have anything he'd like to do. He's going to let the ball punch me for 2 and see what happens. I'm spent. All my materials are expended. I don't have much I can do myself, so I would just take the damage, and it would just be build face up from the top of my deck. Just like so. Eventually, like we said, you'll run out of this. I'll be here, and that's the game.
So that's one of the more straightforward ways to win the game. We actually found that getting war experience points is a little bit more difficult, but that may have to do with the fact as well that we obviously both are quite, well, I mean, I don't want to float our own flags, but quite experienced players by now with this particular game. When we get to explaining how the war experience points work, we will set up a scenario where we have actual combat happening on board. But early parts of the game, you're probably not really going to be scoring a lot of war XPs. Probably going to be looking at more trying to mill your opponent's deck.
Exactly.
So with this attack going through, I will decide to hold back my core fighter. I don't want to do any more attacks. I'd also like to keep up a potential blocker for my next turn, because very importantly, once your card goes out to battle, it won't be able to defend during your opponent's turn. Only at the beginning of your next turn will all your cards come back to your dock again. And that's also why it's very important, as you guys see, that the attack phase happens before the strategy phase, just giving another layer to this particular card game. So my ball has now basically has done its job, unless Derek has some sort of a way to remove it. I seriously can't do anything with this card until my next turn, and I will be able to bring it back. So I decide not to do anything else in my battle phase. Obviously, I will pass priority to Derek for a minute in case he wants to play something or activate an effect.
Nothing from me. And then attacks are declared one card at a time. So he would choose to swing with ball, resolve it, then he could choose to attack with the core fighter separately. You don't announce all attacks at once, so just one at a time. But as he said, now we're out of the battle phase. Neither of us has anything to do, so he'd be at his strategic phase.
So when I move on to my strategic phase, I'm just thinking about, well, I really want to set up for future turns. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to spend 2 of my materials, and I'm going to bring a Bright Noah into my dock. Now, Bright Noah is a dock pilot, and actually, in this particular instance, the card even says so, which is quite a rare situation. Basically, what Bright Noah gives for me is all my Earth Federation MS-type battleship cards, clash points is increased by 1. And this obviously will sort of give you an idea where this is heading. There is quite a powerful combination when it comes to getting a few weenies down and then bringing out battleship cards, which are more difficult to defend. But with that, for my strategy phase, and unless Derek wants to do anything else, I will pass back to him.
Yep, and that would be my turn. Now, this will be sort of the last of the turns that we kind of demonstrate for the sake of the video itself, just because it is going to allow us to show an actual combat scenario. But I would draw my card for turn. I would re-prepare my materials, create a material for the factory, choose to swap anything out, which I will do. And then we would go into the attack phase. Now, I have a Leo who can't defend. So he's really just a meat stick ready to fight. That's what he's for. So I'm going to move him out. He's going to be 5 attack points. I don't have anything else I'd like to do special before or after that. So at this point, Buzz could choose to either take the 5 to his supply base or defend.
So the first thing I'm looking at is I've already spent my materials, so I will not be reacting with any event cards. I'm looking at Derek's side. He still has 3 active materials, so he can also buff if he wants to. He could play, obviously, a lot of different events, sort of battle tricks and stuff like that. So it really boils down to 2 things. Either I take his attack, which is a 5 attack into face, which would mean I need to mill 5 cards from my deck, or I send out my core fighter to chump block. And because we haven't shown war experience points yet, I'm going to send out my core fighter to chump block.
Now this would be, as he kind of mentioned, a spot where he would have to decide, does he want to keep the core fighter on the board for the purposes of reducing the cost of his Gundam card, which is part of what his deck is, built to do, or does he not want to take 5 or potentially more if I have some combat tricks to increase that damage right to the face? It's kind of up to him. Now, choosing to defend, what we do, we compare our clash points to each other. Now, I am a 5, as we previously stated. He's just a 1. I now have the option to play a card to increase that, decrease his, do whatever I wanted to do. I don't have anything that I would like to do in this spot. So I say pass priority to Buzz and see if he has any response.
I have no responses.
Okay, so now after everything is played, we would factor in any changes to the total values and finish out the math. 5 versus 1. You would do 1 damage to my card. I would do 5 to him. Damage just stays, it's not really damage in the sense that it would permanently hurt the card. It's just for the sake of the battle. But that would defeat the card. Now I would, by having defeated that card, I would score 1 experience point for myself. And that gets me 1 point closer to physically winning the game through these 6 experience points necessary to win.
So if you could kill 6 of my suits, the 6th one you kill would win you the game.
That would win me the game. Now that is the gist of the gameplay itself. Obviously, as he mentioned, he has some cards that are focused more on some special abilities that make them harder to block, make them easier to fight with, and etc. That is obviously more advanced and comes as you get more into building your deck and seeing what you want the actual game to do. But that's the basic gist of getting a game started, the turn flow, and how basic combat works. We do, obviously, the 6 war experience points is something that you are pushing to achieve. That is the primary win con, although it doesn't normally happen like Buzz mentioned, or at least with our gameplay styles. One reason that might be for that is there is one thing that happens that we haven't mentioned yet, and it is called the Rebel Forces. Now, if you've ever watched any of the Gundam animes themselves, the shows are full of political intrigue and strife and in-faction fighting and things like that. This game reflects that a little bit as well. Once you become war hungry and you're pushing for just more experience through the efforts of war, your own people may tend to turn against you. So what happens is you eventually hit multiple war experience points. You get to 4. Once you hit 4, you reveal the top 5 cards of your deck, and any MS cards in there, oh my god, will be placed into the Rebel Forces area, which is just sort of off-board in front of you, and they are now attacking you. Your deck is turning against you. In this case, I got lucky. I only got two cards to fight against. These then will go, they'll just get shuffled back into my deck, and we'll proceed from there. Now, shuffle those in. One thing that we will, that does happen though with the revealed 5 cards is if you draw multiple copies of a unique unit, obviously that can't happen. They also can't take your unique units from you. So you're kind of looking at what happens with these generic sort of grunt guys. Now, I got pretty unlucky though with my draws. I've got a guy who is 3, just like you saw him shining on the board earlier. And then you got the thing my deck does, which is a terrible thing to have drawn. But also, this card has a clash points of 4, and it becomes a 6 when it attacks. So this guy is really, really big every time he attacks me. That sucks. That's going to be hard to fight. And now I have to fight against this every turn too until I can kill it. Now, the Rebel Forces, they attack you in a slightly different phase than your actual battle phase. This is done in your, prior to your preliminary phase, correct? So, the thing that's really hard about your Rebel Forces is that they will attack you before your guys have time to respond to that. They don't really want to wait for you. So, once they attack you, you have the same sort of defense phases that you have in a normal battle itself. One specific thing, though, is you can't play event cards against them. You are just sort of stuck fighting them. It's just physical. Try to battle it out. See if you can get them off the board. These come back. It happens during your preliminary phase before you've done anything for your turn. So you don't untap, you don't draw. Just anything that is ready to fight you hits you in the face. See what you can do. If you can't defend it, you have to take that damage. If you can defend it, that's fine. If you can beat them in battle, that'll get rid of them. Now, these do not give you additional war experience points. You are just defending yourself. You're not becoming more experienced through your accolades of war. You're just trying not to die. And that's kind of that phase. So there's a little bit of a drawback to getting yourself too close to physically winning the game. You can sometimes draw a really bad draw that hurts you real bad. Sometimes you'll get lucky and you'll just hit 2 little Leos and they're easy to get rid of. Or maybe a couple of balls or a couple of core fighters. Or maybe, a big old 6 cost guy. That's kind of the gamble that you take. So one thing that you sort of balance is what you want your deck to do. Are you going to focus on that and just trying to get to the 6 and push through that? Or are you just going to go for the deck out? And that also adds to deck building too. You can't just flood your deck with giant beefcake guys because they might turn on you. And there's nothing you can do about that.
Yeah, and I think that also shows a very good difference between decks and deck building type. If I would, like, for example, this deck I am showing you guys, obviously, kind of is built around getting Gundam out, the OG Gundam. So once I get Gundam out, and let's say I do hit Rebel forces when I get to 4. If I flip another Gundam, that Gundam can't come into play because I already have Gundam in play.
Yep.
Although I think Gundam is not a unique one. Is he?
I don't believe that the Gundam was unique.
So Gundam could come into play. But the thing is, where my deck really shines is when Gundam has Amuro Ray or Sailor Mass attached, it gets additional 2 clash points. So even if I do get a Gundam that I need to defend against, what I can do is I can hold back a card to make sure that when my Rebel forces activate, I can still defend against them. So it's not going to hit you unexpected, and definitely very important how you build your deck around it. Normally, most decks that are out there will be looking at soft to be usually made out of more unique suits, whereas your early guys will be sort of the grunts, the Leos, the Bulls, the core fighters. They won't realistically do big damage to you if you click on your points. But you know, it gives a bit of a random ability. And there are a few cards which also interact with Rebel forces.
Make it a little bit less random. This guy, you can pay 5 and activate your opponent's Rebel forces. Regardless of what their war experience is at, they're just getting attacked. This guy sort of weasels his way in there, talks a little nonsense, and turns your guys against you.
So, as you guys can see, we try to keep anything and everything we could from the core game that made this particular game authentic. Not just in terms of what we believe was the original dream with this card game, but also making it faithful to all the anime. We both love anime. We both love all the different timelines and different series that the Mobile Suit Gundam franchise has. So what we have been doing is not only erratering the cards and making sure there is a playable sort of game in there, but also we have been designing new cards. So hopefully eventually we're going to get to a point where we can release an additional sort of fan set, which also will be print and play.
Yep.
Like else.
The original set 3, as Buzz mentioned earlier, is just 2 starter decks: the Zeon starter deck and the Earth Federation starter deck. There was a planned booster series for this set that never came out. It's super evident too because there are cards within these starter decks that exist that don't exist. The rulebook itself mentions cards that don't exist, and there are promos such as the one he showed you earlier that were a part of a nationwide tour that reflect cards that don't exist either. At this point, I think there's half a dozen, maybe 10 cards that we found that have been named within the game but are not physically available anywhere. So that'll be sort of part of the first fan set, would just be creating all the cards that actually exist, or that were supposed to exist, have been known to have been planned at least. Lastly, the only real thing we haven't covered at this point is some of the unique keywords for the game. Now, he mentioned that at one point within his deck he runs cards with the effect Battleship. This is a keyword that previously in the original rules didn't mean anything at all. It just was a card type. Now this does have an effect. When a card with Battleship attacks, it can only be defended by another Battleship or by 2 mobile suits. Thematically, if battleships are massive, giant pillars of lasers, and one tiny little mobile suit wouldn't be able to fight that off. So you need 2. Now, as we mentioned before, you can't defend with 2. That's not something you can do unless you have guys such as this guy who allow you to block with 2 guys at once. So this kind of effect becomes incredibly important to kind of factor into your deck building. Is, do you want to be able to stop these battleship decks? Now for me, I know Buzz plays a lot of battleship decks, and they're really strong, so I kind of try to work some of that in. You might not. That might not be part of, what would have been your meta scene if there were actively more players playing this. that comes down to your preference, your deck building, how your playgroup plays. If you have a buddy who has never touched a battleship card in his life, maybe defending with 2 cards at the same time means nothing to you. Or maybe you run enough removal cards to blow his battleships off the board and not have to care. That's kind of up to you. That's where deck building comes from. The only other real important keyword is mobile armor. Buzz, I'll let you handle that one.
You put me on the spot. This deck doesn't have one. Let me take one out real quick.
I've got one handy. Well, maybe not quite as handy, but I've got one, and it'll be a nice one. For example, Buzz will love this.
Oh yes, that's my boy.
Now this card is a mobile armor. What does that mean, Buzz?
So mobile armor cards are same as battleship cards. They came out only in the Xeon and Earth Federation starter decks. Mobile armors basically get +1 clash points when they're defending. That's their unique ability, and that allows them to be generally good defensive cards. But also Earth Federation has some requirements to play certain battlefield cards that require you to have mobile armors in play. So they will be a pivotal part when you're looking at building a Xeon deck. And very similar to Earth Federation, to have battleships in play, you can get some good advantages by having battleships in play.
Now you'll notice this mobile armor here has an additional keyword, which I'm going to get real clear here, but it says sand. Now there are a couple keywords in this game, sand, sea, as he's got there, sand and sea, both readily available. He's also showed you a card that has new type. There may be a couple other random mentions of keywords. They're mostly card effect specific text. The only 2 keywords that really do anything additional is mobile armor and battleship.
Mobile armor and battleship, sea and sand, they're all basically, they're not a keyword, they're more an MS type. And because it's an MS type, it's important to remember, even if a card effect would, let's say, completely negate the effects of your suit, because it's a type of effect that would still be occurring, which is quite important because they're types and not part of the effect. You can sort of build decks that will specifically phase you in sand. For example, is a very good strategy for the Wing Gundam faction. Mechanics, they have the sand type, again, very
that is the deck I have built right here. These guys can't be defended unless your opponent has a sand unit. So they're just unblockable little guys unless your opponent's prepared for it. And this whole deck is built around making everything a sand guy.
And the Ostrich, for example, has quite a nice little roster of C-type cards. And again, there will be battlefields that might buff them. But what's really interesting is every single faction is quite unique in terms of what they're good at and what they're not so good at. And that really helps the player decide what sort of deck they would like to build. If you want to go, any deck can have units flexible or difficult to block. Any faction has better pilots and good dock pilots. Every faction has good vanguards, good vanguards. But realistically, it's just down to your deck building style and see what you want to build, what's your favorite faction, and you will most likely find a playstyle that suits you.
One last thing then, getting into playstyles and decks themselves, is we'll just mention lastly deck building. He mentioned before that you have to have a 50-card deck, but within a deck you can have 3 copies of any given card in the deck. This helps with consistency and seeing the cards you need. Now, that being said, there are a couple cards in the game that are real strong. Most of them are wing cards, and they are the sort of suits from the Endless Waltz movie, the Wing Zero Custom, the Sandrock, or the Heavy Arms Custom, Decide Hell Custom, the Sandrock Custom, and then also the Wing Gundam Zero. Now, all of these cards have very, very strong effects. Most of them void some manner of effect themselves. This Death Scythe, for example, voids any battlefield card's effects, just completely blanks the card. Now, those are very strong if you were just able to pile a deck full of them, and they're also big, strong cards. So we don't want that to be an oversaturated portion of the game. Oz also has a couple of these units, the Ultron and the Toggies 2. These cards are both limit 1 as well. One of these per deck. Now you can have both of these in the same deck. You're not limited to one limit 1 card, but just one copy of each of them per deck. You could, if you wanted, I don't know if it would be great, but you could build this into a deck if you wanted to. Be a big heavy top end, but you could do it. Now, little clue here. This might be seeing a little more love in the future. Talking about that right now. Seeing if this might come off the limited list. It's not nearly as good as the rest of these as far as overall effectiveness. See what happens. It's kind of an iconic card. It'd be cool to have a deck around it. And that's the End of Waltz.
And the only effect card that we currently have limited to 1 is End of Waltz.
Yep.
It's just a very powerful dark hole effect. But because you can only play this in your strategy phase, that means you can swing in, potentially even sacrifice your units, and then when you go into your strat phase, you just drop this guy and basically clear the board.
Yep.
So right now, because this is the only card in the whole play, in the whole game, that has basically a full sweep effect to not overpower any faction. Just with all those specific unit cards that Derek has shown you, we have End of Waltz limited to 1.
Yes.
But I would love to see Wing Gundam Zero Custom from the Endless Waltz movie become a 3-of, and we are currently testing quite a lot to make sure that we can actually bring that to you guys. So stay tuned. If you are interested, please do join our Facebook group. Please have a look on the wiki page as well. You can find scans from the cards there. What else?
That's all you need. There'll be there's individual scans of all the cards. There'll be a print and play sheet prepared for each faction as well. So you can just choose, I want to play the Wing Gundam team. You just print the whole team, every Wing Gundam card, print it, play it, cut it, you're ready to go. Or you can just do everything, it's up to you. That's pretty much the gist of how to get into the game. Obviously, you're welcome to, if you do decide that you're interested, to post in the group, make conversation, talk about decks, talk about cards for sale or that you're looking for. Obviously, at this point, there's more collectors than players, just with the new rules being as new as they are. But that is turning a little bit as time goes on. So you're welcome to ask how card rulings work. You're welcome to interact with any of us directly, and I'm sure people would be happy to oblige.
And we have 24/7 coverage as well, don't we?
Pretty much. We're separate sides of the pond here, so there's always at least one of the two of us who can say something to you. So thanks for hanging out. Thanks for watching the video. Hopefully this at least gives you the initial idea of how to play the game. There's a video already online of a match actually occurring. There will be more of those coming in the future as we continue to play this game we love. And stay tuned for more of that. Stay tuned for updates on cards themselves. See if the fan said when that comes around the corner here. And until next time.
Yeah, you too.